What's up, queens? Welcome to the Female Dating Strategy Podcast, the meanest female-only podcast on the internet. I'm Ro.
And I'm Savannah.
So today is the first in our series of listener-inspired slice of life FDS episodes, where we get a chance to interview our FDS listeners and get some insight into their personal journey from pick me to queen, or I don't know, maybe not pick me to queen, because some people have been queen energy from day one, which I totally admire.
I'm slightly jealous of as well.
Slightly jealous, right? So,
but today we are absolutely delighted to welcome June to our podcast. June is very active within our Discord community, and we are really, really excited to interview her today. So welcome to the FDS podcast, June.
Thanks, ladies. Ro, I will say it is Pick Me to Queen. That is, I think, an accurate title for my journey for sure.
We've all been there.
Maybe that could be the title of like the FDS book, Pick Me to Queen.
Pick Me to Queen.
I love it.
So June, thank you so much for being willing to join us and to share your story, because it sounds like you've had such an interesting journey, and I think our listeners would really benefit from hearing a bit more. But, first of all, can you tell us about, your background specifically in dating? So what was your dating philosophy before? How you came to find FDS, how you found FDS initially? Because I remember when I first came across FDS, I was going through the mist of ending a relationship that should have really ended within 3 months, but I dragged it out to 3 years. And I felt personally attacked at first. So it'll be interesting to see how, not only you found FDS, but your initial response to FDS as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you just said resonates with me. I started dating the person that I married very young. Started dating at 18. And so, I wouldn't say I had a fully fledged dating philosophy at that age. I just was kind of, I met somebody and we got along well. So let's just see where it goes was kind of the philosophy. Been a serial monogamist my whole life. And so that was always really important to me. I think my parents have been married for 36 years. And so having that role model for me was really important to find a partnership that I thought was similar to what they had without really understanding what that meant at that age. And so, after sort of going through this relationship and it ultimately ending in a divorce, that's actually right around the time that I found FDS. And so kind of, Savannah, like you said, I felt personally attacked, wow, how was I missing all of these things? And I think, I live in an area that's very liberal. So lib fem ideology is very strong where I live. And so I was sort of kind of under that too. And so this idea of all this kind of radical feminism was really new for me, although, liberal feminism was a concept that I was very familiar with and kind of comfortable with. So when I sort of joined FDS and I saw all these radical feminism ideologies, they were kind of, in a lot of ways, at odds with how I knew feminism. And so there was a lot of kind of self-reconciliation I had to do with sort of my understanding and my viewpoint of the world as a woman. So it's definitely been a journey since then of sort of stripping down a lot of that stuff and looking back at interactions and decisions and treatment that I accepted through my life, personally and professionally. It's taken some time of self-work and kind of consoling my past self, if that makes sense.
Accepting who you were at the time, right? That's always the hard thing whenever you grow as a person. Man, past me was so cringe.
Yes. Girl, were you okay? That was the question I asked myself a lot through that journey. But being kind to myself and going, you know what? We all grow at different points in our life. And sometimes it takes really painful experiences to get there. And I really have to say that I think FDS really came into my life at a time that I needed it the absolute most. I'm going through this divorce and my whole life is changing in really significant ways. I was 30 when this happened. And so, that's kind of a transition into a new decade in your life too. And so FDS coming into my life at that point was seriously a lifeline for me. Honestly, because it was I'm getting stripped down and I have this opportunity to rebuild myself and my life in a way that is going to make me wiser and more resilient in the next phase.
Makes perfect sense. I think with FDS as a philosophy, why it's so difficult for people to understand. Like, well, I don't think it's difficult. Why some people claim it's difficult to understand or that they have trouble reconciling it with their feminist principles is because like we're not feminists that are doing it based on the idea that there's like a simple philosophy to follow. It's more or less like what is a strategy to get the things that we want that's going to benefit us more, which I think is like such a subtle shift in thinking. Maybe not subtle. Actually, I think it's a massive shift in thinking.
Yeah, I would agree, right? I really think about how women are conditioned through our lives. It's selflessness, right? Like that's the greatest thing that we can have as a woman is to give to everybody else around us and never ask for anything in return. And, you know, when I think about some of the missteps that I've taken in relationships in the past, it's really centered in that. It is centered in a selflessness, in giving, and accepting, frankly, crumbs in return from a partner. And so that you're right, that shift to, you know, what many people would assume or label as selfish of I put me first and I am making decisions that are beneficial to me and beneficial to women in general. It goes against how we're socialized. Certainly, you know, I'm American, so how we're socialized here, I wouldn't imagine it's much better in most parts of the world, but, you know, definitely socialized to give to everybody else. So that is a tough shift. And it feels kind of, you have to like flex that muscle, right? You have to kind of work that muscle out that it's okay to put yourself first, you know, because no one else is going to.
So let's talk about your divorce then in relation to that revelation.
Yeah, I think, you know, kind of how I was talking about, you know, kind of being kind to my past self and showing her some grace. I think one of the really difficult things that came out of FDS for me was, you know, this realization that there was abuse in my relationship, in my marriage that I was not aware of in the moment. I think I was aware of it, but it really kind of honed it in for me. Like some of these just kind of changing my perspective on relationships and like the treatment that I should expect, I guess. And that probably was the single hardest realization for me through my FDS journey was that, you know, okay, my marriage ended and that was difficult and marriages end for all kinds of reasons, but also realizing that, oh, the treatment that you received throughout the entire marriage was so much less than you deserve. I think that was probably the hardest thing to reconcile. And, you know, even now, years later, it is still something that I am dealing with. And it's still something that I get in my current relationship that I'm like acutely aware and really critical of a lot of the time because there's such a creep on that, like on poor treatment in a relationship. I feel like it creeps up on you. You let one thing slide and then another thing slide. And it kind of is like this cascading effect of indicating to your partner that like, oh, I can treat you this way. And oh, this thing's okay now because you let it slide. And I think, you know, that's something that's been a really big learning experience for me through both FDS strategy and then being a part of the community and talking to other women who have, you know, gone through similar situations to me and sort of talking through some of those realizations with them.
I think like just going back to what you said about poor treatment in relationships being a cascading effect, I think that's such a powerful thing to say. And it is really, really true as well. And that's one of the reasons why at FDS, we've always said, you know, watch out for the red flags. Oftentimes, you know, low value men, they start off small to almost test your boundaries. You know, when they see they can get away with, you know, something, they'll gradually escalate, almost like the boiling frog analogy as well. But I wanted to touch on as well, because you mentioned at the top of the episode, that obviously your parents have been married for quite some time. And, you know, you yourself identify as a monogamist, somebody who believes in long relationships. You know, so what was, I guess, the process, you know, like when it came to actually ending your marriage? Because I would imagine that was a huge decision. And especially as women, we almost feel under so much pressure to make it work with the person that we've picked or the person that we've married, even when it's clearly not working as well. So walking away, even though in our head we know it's the right thing to do, but actually doing it can be very, very difficult.
You know, one of the things that I struggled with in my marriage, and I think so many women struggle with, and I think it's a many women, it takes kind of getting older and more experience to pick this up, but really setting boundaries is hard. And, that cascading effect, that the boiling frog analogy is so perfect for sort of what I experienced. And I think a lot of women experience in their relationships. And it just got to a point where it just kind of, it boiled over, if you will, that there was kind of a final boundary that I had that was like, it was a non-negotiable for me, and it was infidelity. And my ex-husband was not faithful to me. And that was the thing that there was no way to come back from that for me. And so when, he came home after a business trip and had said, like, I don't think I'm going to be married anymore. And I mean, this was just like a shock to me. I mean, a complete shock to me. And then realizing, oh, he had gone on a business trip with a coworker and now they're texting all the time. And, and so I think that for me was like, that was the nail in the coffin. I didn't see a path forward. And talk about gray rock. Like, I just gray rocked at that point. I was just so done. I had completely dead to me at that point. I mean, it was just like this switch flipped where I just was like so done. And I'm actually really, it was horrible and it's like incredibly painful, but it was the thing that I needed to be able to walk away. And so in that regard, I'm thankful for that, because I think you're right. I probably would have, I would have kept trying and figuring it out. And I remember when I was going through, and I'm very close with my parents. I'm an only child. I'm incredibly close with my parents. I'm so lucky to have such wonderful parents. And I remember I was at my parents' house when I was kind of like going through this process, and my dad asked me, I was kind of like, well, what do I do? Do I stay? Do I stay? Do I walk away? What do I do? And my dad asked me this question that really has stuck with me. He said, if you stay, what are you losing? What are you losing? And I thought about it and I'm like, I'm losing myself. I will be indicating in this relationship that you can do and say anything to me and I will stay. And that right there, I think in the next few days, I filled out the paperwork and I filed the paperwork and I was divorced 11 days later. I remember just like, it was such a poignant conversation with my dad. And, my parents are very much like, you got to make the decision for you, but really good at asking the right questions to get me thinking. And that question just really, it stuck with me. It really like bored into me of like, I would be giving up myself if I stayed.
It's so hard to accept and understand in that situation where you are in a marriage that you've been in a long time. And I would even say just marriage, like even like a job or something that you've really committed to, and like accept and understand when you've reached a point of no return and it's time to choose yourself, because it's not always clear, to be fair, right? I think, like you said, infidelity can be the thing, I think, is a line that most people draw, and people understand, okay, if this happens, then I am totally within my right and it makes sense to end a marriage. It's actually even like in a lot of religious cultures, like the one exception to having to stay in a marriage for women even is like infidelity.
Yeah. This is why this is a bit of a tangent, but why I'm baffed why the church encourages people to stay together after infidelity, when even Jesus said, like, nope the fuck out. Like, I'm honestly baffled.
Even Jesus said, wrap it up.
He literally says,
even Jesus says, wrap it the fuck up. Like, it's over. That person cheats, just pack it up. But there's also a lot of, a person generally doesn't just start cheating out of nowhere. There's usually other tells that they are deprioritizing you in that relationship prior to them actually doing it.
Well, that's the thing, right? So part of this journey for me has been, and it is painful to look back. So I was with this person for 11 years, from the time I was just about to turn 19 until I was 30. And so like we basically became adults together. We did all of the like learning how to be an adult together. And so, like all the big milestones that happen in your, 20s and college and, moving out and buying your first house and all of these things we kind of did together. And so I think, I look back now, a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last few years is really looking back at that relationship and examining things that at the time, they maybe there was like a little red flag, or like I kind of noted it in my mind. And then you just kind of, right, you move on from it, because it is that cascading effect where it's like, oh, it's not that big a deal. And, I'm thinking about, I can't remember what episode it was. It was the last episode, I think, where you were talking about gaslighting, and that people use the term gaslighting incorrectly. And, I think this is actually a situation where there was absolutely gaslighting and, where humor was the thing that was used in my marriage. Humor was the thing that was used to sort of manipulate the situation or gaslight me. Like, oh, I was just joking, or you're being too sensitive, or, like kind of dismissing my feelings about stuff through humor, or making a joke at my expense around people to diminish me or make me small was like the common thing that happened in my relationship. And so, it digs into it because it's hard to pinpoint. It's not anger. It's not like yelling. It's not physical abuse. It's this, oh, well, I was just joking, and doing that publicly around friends and family to sort of diminish your experience. And so I've spent the last few years really digging into these situations that I remember kind of having like a yuck feeling about in the moment, but then being diminished by, oh, I was just joking. You're overreacting. You're being too sensitive. And actually going, no, you weren't being too sensitive. You should have listened to your gut, and you should have really paid attention to how these different comments and situations were making you feel. That's the work that I've been doing. And so finding like recalibrating myself, I guess, is a lot of what I've been doing to kind of get back to trusting my gut, because over time, when someone chips away at you in that way, you question everything. You question your mindset. You question how sensitive you are. You question your understanding of situations. It is really hard to undo all of that damage.
I mean, you were young too. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, you started dating him when you were 19. And I think who we are at 19 is quite different than who we are by 30. I don't know. That's why I'm such a big fan of the rotational dating model, even when you're young, because I feel like when you're young, it's easy to always question yourself because you don't have any basis of alternative experience, right? So I find this to be true with jobs. I found this to be true with relationships, that sometimes like the old advice that women are often given to like commit to something early and be like slow and steady can actually really limit you, because you basically fold it into a system that already exists or a man that already exists. And then you don't necessarily have a full sense of yourself or what is okay and what's not okay and what options you have. So a lot of that makes like perfect sense for the fact that you guys started dating when you were teenagers. You know what I mean? Pros and cons to long-term relationships. Because I think a lot of times the push for women is always to like prioritize the long-term relationship. And there's some disadvantages in that you may not know when you're not being treated well because you don't have any basis of comparison.
I think I want to touch on that piece too, because, where this relationship started too, I was not too far out of another relationship that was abusive in a more traditional sense, if you will, before that. So my high school sweetheart, it was an abusive relationship as well. And I didn't take the time to heal between. And it set me up for, this person's treating me marginally better, and accepting that, right? Because, they're not doing these things. They're treating me better. And I think so much about all of the, through the podcast, as well as other articles about these things, is like the mask slipping, right? So great. The first 6 months, great. He was all of these things, and it felt so much better in comparison to the previous relationship I had. And so you kind of, again, you're accepting that.
Yeah. You've touched on a really good point. And this is, why I encourage my friends and even myself, and organizations do this as well, when they're looking at recruitment, or companies that are truly looking for the best candidates, is what they will do is that they will assess each candidate to an objective standard. So I remember when I was applying for government roles, they said, at the assessment center, you are being assessed as an individual. So it could be that all of you passed today or none of you passed today. It's not a case of, this person is slightly better than that person, so they pass. Because the issue with that is that you stop looking at each candidate holistically, and instead you start looking at, they're slightly better in this area, so therefore they move forward. And I've seen, myself and other women, we make this mistake where, let's say our previous partner was, verbally and physically abusive. the next partner might not be verbally or physically abusive, but they might be lazy or they might be emotionally abusive. But we say, oh, well, because he's not hitting me, he treats me better, when actually we're not assessing the new guy to an objective standard or to an independent standard. And especially if you've been in a bad relationship before, it's a really, really terrible idea to compare future men to your ex, because you are already starting from a baseline that is in the Mariana Trench. Like, the baseline is already low. And I see women make this mistake. Oh, they're better than my ex. My ex was this and this new guy's like that. And the new guy turns out to be just as shit, just in a different way. So this is why I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's about having an independent standing when it comes to men. Because if we accept that a lot of men are trash, you know, that's why it's important to have that independent standards. And there are many, many ways that men can be trash as well.
Well, and I think about, you know, that boundary that I talked about with my marriage, it was infidelity. I mean, that is, talk about end of the road boundary, right? That is like, again, it's the only exception in the church, right? In some cases. And so that boundary is, it's kind of the last thing. It's the end of the road. That's why it's so important for women to develop those boundaries at a young age. And I'm apparently a late bloomer in developing some of these boundaries. And, you know, it's better late than never is kind of how I've looked at it, is it shouldn't have had to get to that point. It should not have gotten to that point where it took infidelity to walk away. There were 100 things before that should have been, that was a boundary and that's been squashed. So I walk away. And it should have been, I think back to before we were married. It's not like, you know, it's not like all of a sudden, as soon as we signed that paperwork, all these red flags popped up or all this mistreatment popped up. It existed before that. And so not having those boundaries in place and doing those comparisons to a previous, even shittier relationship essentially set me up to accept, you know, something marginally better because I didn't have those boundaries in place. It was like, that was the last thing standing was the infidelity. It's like, that's a pretty flimsy thing between, you know, leaving or staying forever and being miserable. And so, you know, when I talk to my friends and, you know, talking to people in the Discord and things, it's like having those boundaries, those non-negotiables that if this happens, I walk away, and meaning it is so important for women.
Facts on facts. I mean,
okay. So moving slightly on from your divorce, and thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like it's really, really brave of women, especially, to be open about the fact that they have been through a divorce, simply because patriarchy somehow demonizes divorced women and single moms a lot more than their male counterparts. So thank you for sharing that with us. I know you've touched on this already, but it'll be interesting to hear about, you know, your dating after a divorce. You've touched on how, you know, you set those boundaries, but how did you actually, you know, put them into practice? Because it's easy having boundaries and standards in theory, but when you're actually out there interacting with men, it can become a bit more difficult. And also just wanted to clarify as well, did you find FDS at this point, around the time when you started going out dating again?
Yeah. So I want to say I discovered FDS like right around like COVID lockdown time. So like March of 2020, I think is when I discovered FDS. And what was interesting, right, is we're all locked down. And so going out on physical dates wasn't where I was. The lockdown was very, very strict. I mean, everything was closed. So going on dates wasn't really physical dates. Going out in person was not really an option at this time. And so that was actually kind of an interesting social experiment to I did a lot of like virtual dates and like phone calls and that kind of thing during this time, which I think was actually a good thing for me as I'm coming out of this divorce and having some distance to basically, you know, it's easy to get caught up. And I think that especially when you're hurting and you're recovering from a really traumatic experience, like a breakup or, you know, or fill in the blank kind of traumatic experience, that we get caught up, right? We want to feel good, and meeting someone new that's exciting and makes us feel good and, you know, is probably love bombing us. It feels good, right? And so having this distance during this time was actually really helpful. And so I used this period of time to enact boundaries with people who didn't mean a lot to me. It feels gross saying that, but it was like,
no, it doesn't. Say it with your chest. I mean,
and also I completely agree. Like having boundaries, I remember reading from a therapist, I can't remember the book, but having boundaries, especially as women, it's like a muscle. The more you use it and flex it, the stronger it gets. So absolutely 100% agree. Like, use these men as training armbands when you like first learn how to swim, so to speak. 100% agree with it.
We were talking about using jobs you don't want for interview practice. So like just apply to a bunch of jobs and then try to schedule all the jobs you don't actually want for interviews ahead of the time. Honest to God.
First.
Dating is not unlike that. Yeah. Practice on them.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know how cognizant of that I was doing that at that time. But looking back, it was like, oh, here's an opportunity, right? With some distance, because we're not meeting each other in person necessarily. Although I did with a few, that I'm thinking through my boundaries and I'm practicing my boundaries. Like, okay, I match with someone on a dating app and they immediately launch into making some gross sexual comment, right? Like, boundary done. Like, we're not talking anymore. We're done. So like, just kind of practicing, like you said, Savannah, flexing that muscle of it's okay to say, I don't like that. No, thank you. I'm moving, next, basically. And so that's what I spent this time doing, was doing that. And then, there was one individual who I got more involved with, and it was, again, a bad situation. And your girl almost made the same mistake again of comparing to the last relationship and accepting marginally better treatment in certain arenas. And, and then I remember I found this, it was like an infographic, and I think it was on FDS. It was like an infographic, and it was about gaslighting, and it was the different markers of gaslighting and the different ways that people do that. And it's like a light bulb went off in my head, and I ended that relationship immediately after seeing that. It was like having this like objective description of what I was experiencing. I just ended it right there. And I went back to the drawing board and kind of went, okay, you almost just fell into the same exact pattern, because, at that point, almost 30 years, well, let's say 15 years of kind of dating and accepting crumbs from people to unlearn. And you're not going to do that in 6 months. So, so there was definitely trial and error during that point. And I learned a lot of my boundaries and how I'm not being a jerk or being an asshole by saying, I don't accept that treatment. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's nothing personal to the other person. It's just, you're not meeting the standard or the expectations that I have, and go find someone else who you do. And that's okay. So there was a lot of sort of, again, like this reconciliation that, I think I talked a little bit earlier about, like, women are conditioned to accept nothing and give everything. And so having to change your mindset on that, it's a hard journey, because it feels like you're being, an ice queen, or you're being callous. We have all these words in our society to describe women who have boundaries or stand up for themselves. And so you're fighting against sort of that rhetoric that you're cruel, or you're going to be a spinster, or, for me, it was, you've hit the wall because you're 30. And so, I'm fighting against these things in this process, while also dealing with a lot of trauma, rebuilding my life. And so I used it as a time to do exactly that, to strip it all down and go, what do you want? And what do you expect of the people around you? And that meant friends, family, and a romantic relationship.
Yeah, I definitely think COVID was almost like the great reset for a lot of women in terms of relationships and what they expected. I remember the subreddit just had this exponential boom in traffic and membership during that COVID period, because I think a lot of women, almost like you described, they were forced to take stock of their relationships and what they wanted from it. And I guess being isolated for the most part made that a lot easier, I think, as well.
Or being stuck in their house with their partner 24/7 and going, what am I doing?
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so moving on slightly as well, during our initial discovery call, you mentioned that you were child-free, a lifestyle that I am very much in favor of personally. Anyway, so in terms of being child-free, how did you navigate that whilst dating as well? Because I know from experience, I've had mixed experiences with men when I mentioned that I have no interest in having their cells populate my womb. So it would be interesting just to hear your thoughts on the child-free lifestyle and how you managed to navigate dating, because you're also in a committed relationship as well. So it'd be good to hear your perspective on that.
I mean, when I was married, I kind of I think again, I'm in this relationship. I got into this relationship at a very young age where I wasn't sure what I wanted out of my life. And so as we were growing up together, if you will, and figuring out adulthood and then we got married. I think we were 24, 25 when we got married. He really wanted children. That was like very important to him. And I think that I sort of accepted that. I kind of said, well, okay, like I'd be fine with one child. And then as we sort of I had all these like benchmarks, right? Once we buy a house, then I'll be ready. And then once I get this kind of job or once I make this amount of money, I'll be ready for that. And so it was like, I had all these things that I felt like I wanted to do or needed to do, and then I would be ready. And I never really got to that place where I was like, oh yeah, now I want a child really bad and I'm ready because I have all the things in place to do it. I never got there. And so, after my divorce, that was one of the things I spent a lot of time thinking about. It's like, did I actually want children and it was the wrong person? Which is, I think, something, that women face where they're like, I do want a child. And then they realize like, oh, it's just not with this person. And then, on the other hand, it's, I don't want children. And that was also the wrong person. So I feel very thankful that I did not have children with my ex-husband. I was able to have a really clean break. And so I'm very thankful for that because, I have friends who have children with their ex and they have to see them, multiple times a week. And I got to just I can't go on there. I cannot go on that subreddit. It really is. And honestly, I spent some time on that subreddit reading through people's stories. And I think, just really kind of thinking through that.
Breaking mom, free contraception.
How did you come to that conclusion? Like, what put you over the hump as far as like definitively deciding that you don't want children?
I really just thought about my life and like, what do I enjoy most about my current life? And what do I want in 5 years? And, I'm a really career driven person. And that's not to say you can't be a mother and be those things, be career driven and do all these other things too. I live alone. I like my peace a lot. I like to be able to come and go as I please. And so, I just thought about the lifestyle that I want. Again, like I know I've mentioned it multiple times now is conditioning, right? Like I thought about how many people in general, but I think particularly women do things because, well, that's the next thing you're supposed to do, right? Well, okay, well, we dated. So now we need to get married because that's the next thing you do. And then, we're married. And so the next thing we should do is have children. And, and the greatest thing you can be is a wife and a mother, right? So I thought a lot about the conditioning that I had and have had, and that's all around us. And I really thought about what is it that I want? And a lot of my female friends are child-free by choice as well. And so spent a lot of time kind of talking with them. One of my dearest friends is 6 or 7 years older than me. And so she's been sure of this for a long time. And so I just spent time talking with the women that I trust and care about. And, and I just didn't see a lifestyle that would make me happy, that would be conducive to having children.
Yeah, I completely relate to that.
I just spent a lot of time thinking about that as an individual, right? Not as in a relationship. It's like I needed to understand what I need as an individual. And then at a point, right, find a partner who fits into that as well, who has those same ideologies that I do and has the same vision for their life. And, Ro, like you said earlier, getting into that relationship that ended in a marriage and ultimately a divorce at such a young age, you don't know who you are. And you have so much growing to do and understanding what you want and those boundaries that you have. I'm at a point now, I'm like in my mid 30s now, and I've had time as an individual and, and I know what I want now. And so looking for a partner that meets those things and the lifestyle that I want and the things that I believe in that are important to me is easier now because I'm sure of those things.
That's so interesting. So do you think there's a difference in the way you have to date if you don't want to have children versus if you are a person that wants to have children? Like, how is it interacting with men?
Yes.
100%. 100%, I would say. I mean, sorry to jump in there, June, but yeah, 100%. It has to be. And it's almost like, I'm not sure if you found this as well, June, but I found that even when I wasn't interested in a man, let's say he was an acquaintance or the partner of like one of my girlfriends, if I said, I'm not having kids, I'm child free, they would start trying to talk me into it. And I'm like, mate, I'm not even going to have kids with you. Why do you care? And they'd be like, oh, you've got good genes, you should have kids. I'm like, fuck off. Like, honestly, men when it comes to women having bodily autonomy, even if, they may not be interested in having kids with you, they get very, very funny about it. And I think it's that conditioning that even, men get, that every woman aspires to be a mother at some point. And I've just never felt that.
Agreed. I think what was so interesting is that, even in dating men that claim to be child-free, or they maybe didn't claim to be child-free, but they were leaning towards not having children. It's like you talk to them and then they're changing, right? They're changing their viewpoint. Well, I mean, I wouldn't mind having one. What do you think about having one? And I would say in sort of those early days of being on dating apps and stuff, I was still working through some of that. And so, maybe I was not as clear on that as I am now, but it was so interesting. Savannah's totally right. And in my personal life too, who's going to take care of you when you're old is something that I hear a lot as a child-free person. And it's like having children to take care of you when you're old is a really messed up reason to have kids in the first place.
I hate that. Children are not a retirement plan. There's so many things that could just blow that plan. And not to mention it's just so selfish. You don't have kids it's like breeding your future carers. That's not a reason to have a child. Yeah.
That particular question or, sort of rhetoric of just has disgusted me through this journey because it's a question I hear regularly. You're going to be alone when you die. Well, everybody is. So, and also like you said, there's a million reasons why your kids wouldn't be there at the end. There's a million reasons for that. So I never understood kind of that thought process, but in dating, it was so interesting because I would get sort of that response from men too, who even said they weren't interested in having kids. Well, what's your purpose then? Kind of that thought. And I'm like, what do you mean? What's my purpose? I have friends and family and hobbies and a job that I love and all these other things. Having a child's not the only reason, the only purpose for women. It really highlighted sort of the deep-seated misogyny that is in our culture and particularly around women's usefulness. That was really eye-opening for me. And so I doubled down last summer and I actually had my tubes removed last summer. And the amount of how much less stress I feel now, just that is a decision I've made. It's a for sure thing. And it's a permanent thing was I was able to take just a sigh of relief, if you will, to be able to make that decision. And I was also so shocked with my doctor was so great. I was expecting to have a fight, right? There's so many horror stories of women who are sure and you got to fight for it. I've known since I was 10 years old that I didn't want to have kids and I'm 30 now. And what if you meet the right man?
Well, then he's not the right man if he wants kids. That's just saying, I don't know, if you met the right guy, but he wants to live in Australia, well, he's not the right one because I don't want to live in Australia. It's about compatibility. And I don't know if you got it as well, because you said you knew from when you were 10, but I always grew up without a maternal instinct in my body. Babies, I find them cute, but I've never thought I want one of my own, ever. And I often got, oh, you'll change your mind when you're older. But it's as I've gotten older and become more into myself, become more successful in my career, it's only made me want kids less. I think if it was 10 years ago, I might be maybe one day, but the older I get and the more successful I become as an individual, the less I want kids.
I agree 100%. I kept waiting for that clock, that internal clock to start ticking. And I'm like, where is she? Why is she not ticking? And it just, that never came for me. And so I thought there was something wrong with me. I don't know if you kind of went through this too, Savannah, that I kind of thought, oh, maybe there's something wrong with me. Why don't I have that maternal instinct? Why don't I have this longing to have children? And then I just realized it's there's nothing wrong with you. You can take a different path and it's maybe one that's kind of less traveled, but that's okay. And I think that, having a child's kind of the one thing you can't undo, right? You take a job you don't like, you can get a different job. You buy a house you don't like, you can sell it and buy a different house, but having a child is a forever commitment. It is a lifetime commitment. And if it's not a hell yeah, it should be a no. And that's kind of how I sort of ended up even starting to explore that is it wasn't something that ever felt exciting to me or something. It felt like a compromise in my marriage, and a child should not be a compromise. And so that for me was really kind of the thing that went, maybe that isn't for you.
Amen, sis. I mean, so obviously you are in a relationship now. How did you vet your partner to ensure that he's actually child free? Like, I know that the future's uncertain, people can change their mind, but you've been together for quite some time. How did you have that conversation? How were you, sure that he was actually child free as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, I just laid it out. I'm kind of a blunt person, pretty direct about stuff. And so I laid that out. And we still that's something we talk about regularly too, like sort of checking in with each other. And I would say he's probably even more like aggressively child free than I am. Like he's known since a very young age and he's not wavered in that at all. And so, he has nieces and nephews and he's kind of like what you said, like, oh, they're cute, but no, thank you. That's just not who he is. And he's very much, we're both very introverted. We both very much like our space and our peace and our alone time. And so again, it's just not conducive to either of our lifestyles, I guess. And so it was pretty clear from the jump. And it's been consistent through our entire relationship that that's not something that either of us are interested in even slightly. And so, he was completely supportive of my decision to get my tubal removal surgery. He took care of me through all of that and was 100% supportive of that. And it wasn't even like, oh, great, you're doing that for us. It was like, that's what you want. I absolutely support you in doing that as an individual, right? That is your decision and it is beneficial to you because that is a choice that you are making about the lifestyle that you want. So even taking it a step further than just like, hey, this is good for both of us and you're taking on the burden of doing that so I don't have to. It was regardless of whether I'm in the picture or not, this is the lifestyle that you want. What can I do to help you?
Nice. And again, I guess, because I see this on some of the child-free subreddits as well, where they have a partner who then just has a 180 and all of a sudden wants kids, which isn't a bad thing. But I think, especially if you are committed to the child-free lifestyle, again, it goes back to maintaining that boundary and not giving in.
I know. Yeah, men are like, my legacy, all of a sudden at 35.
Oh, my legacy. If you've got $1 million in assets or pounds in assets,
my legacy.
Then we can start talking about your legacy and your titles passing down.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, I feel like nobody wants your collection of Hot Wheels and Star Wars action figures.
And your student loan debt.
Your student loan debt.
And your Cheeto dust.
Your Cheeto dust. None of this is worth anything.
I mean, so pivoting slightly actually from the child-free stuff. So, obviously Ro and I are running a careers series in tandem on the bonus content, where it's mainly Ro ranting about corporate, but there's some gems in there as well. I didn't realize the can of worms are open when I suggested the careers series, because Ro was like, oh, okay. And then every week she just gets angrier and angrier with corporate.
I can't stop ranting. There's just so much to be mad about. It's kind of bad. Sorry, y'all, but I mean, I'm in America, so we have no workers' rights. So I feel like comparatively, and just the amount of hyper competitiveness and the lack of any type of worker protections of any kind, that's what America's like right now. So I don't think I'm not the only person who's like that.
She's off again. She's off again. She is off again.
Accepting crumbs in our relationships and in our jobs.
Yeah, it's really bare minimum crumbs out here. It really is.
And now Ro is going on mute. Joking.
And it's the mind games on top of it. Okay, so listen to the career series on Patreon. Check out our Patreon, patreon.com/female dating strategy if you want me hear me rant about corporate America.
So obviously you are also quite senior in your career as well. And it'll be interesting to get a bit of an idea about your career path and how you've, navigated ascending the corporate ranks, so to speak, in the corporate hellscape that is the US of A.
This is probably my favorite topic to talk about when we talk about feminism and radical feminism, is like how to utilize kind of your femininity in your professional life. So I'm in a leadership role. I work in government, and so slightly less of a hellscape than corporate America, I will say, but much better benefits and things in government. But when I'm thinking sort of like parallel of my relationship and my career, you know, where I was really sort of silenced and made to feel small in my relationship. I think back to that point in my career, and that was showing up professionally for me too, where I was in spaces professionally where I was told I was too much, I was too loud, I was too passionate, I was too assertive, I was too fill in the blank things.
Preach. Oh,
it was such a hard point in my career because I am this like passionate, strong-willed, assertive woman. And it's like the things that make me who I am and that I love most about myself. And I'm being told those things are wrong, both at home.
They don't want women like that in corporate America's women like that peep the manipulation, the mind games, etc.
Yep. So I was getting that at home and I'm getting that at work too. So, you know, I remember kind of like going like, who am I? You know, having sort of an existential crisis at this point of like, who am I? Because I had been like, when I think of like all through school and into college and stuff, I was just like this force kind of, you know, in my academic career. And then I'm stepping into this professional world and I'm coming in at, you know, entry level. So, you know, seen and not be heard. And then, you know, I'm trying to sort of climb up the rungs professionally and I'm still being told like, know your place basically. And so, and it was from other women. And that was the hardest thing was it was from other women that were much older than me that were sort of like squashing me. And, you know, like I remember I had this boss that was she was much older than me. She was probably in her late 60s, early 70s. And I'm like 25 at this point. And I came in and I'm like, I have all these things that I can offer. I can, you know, make things more efficient. I can build new systems. And I saw all these things that we could make better. And I had all these ideas and I was hungry. And the biggest squasher of sort of my drive was other women. And I think that was really hard for me it's like, we're supposed to be on the same team here. We're supposed to be supporting each other.
That's unfortunately been my experience as well.
It's been my experience as well. Like all the aggro in my career has been caused by other women.
Well, I think to be blunt, and I don't know, it's not to create like a necessary division with women, but like there's two things in my opinion that might be going on. And one of it is that the women that ascend through the ranks in any type of way tend to be the type of women who are willing to be that kind of person to squash, exploit, and bully other women. Because remember, they're operating within the bounds of that patriarchy that is generally headed by men. And then on the other hand, I think what happens is some of them just peter principle out and they're very threatened with their own job security by newer workers. So then like their incentive is then just to like subtly sabotage anybody who thinks they might have promise.
And I think both were at play here. Like I've seen both sort of coexist in the same person, right? Well, like I paid my dues. And so you need to too. And I'm going to make it as hard for you as it was for me. And so, you know, I think that's more devastating than facing, like I faced that from men in my, you know, throughout my career too, but it was certain women that did it much more. And that's devastating for me as a young professional. And just starting out my career was like, I saw, you know, women in leadership and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to aspire to be them. And I want to sort of hook myself to them to learn from them so that I can be in their position one day. And I can, you know, and not like their exact position, like I'm not gunning for your job, but so I can ascend to that level eventually. And again, it was like, it was met as a threat. And it was like, I want to learn from you, like mentor me, like teach me what you know. And so I've been in a leadership position a little over a year now and in senior positions for a couple of years now. And it's so interesting. You know, my sort of leadership philosophy or perspective is I really think about my experiences through my career and how different things that people that I respected or that I reported to or managed me, the things that they said or did and how that made me feel. And I really try to be cognizant of that when I'm working with my staff or, you know, I lead from a place of I'm kind of an emotional leader, I would say. And I think that's where I've leaned into my femininity is not trying to be the sort of quote unquote man in leadership, you know, having to act like a man to be successful in leadership. I really reject that. And I lead from a strong place of empathy with my staff. I lead from vulnerability. I'm really open and honest with my staff. And, you know, sometimes maybe to a fault. But I do show vulnerability to my staff, like, hey, I'm having a hard day and this is why, and this is the support that I need from you guys. And so, trying to create a more collaborative environment where all voices are valuable to the work and recognizing, I think, Ro, this will probably resonate with you. And burnout is so significant in US work culture. Burnout is no joke here. Like, people are exhausted, and the last 3 years, like sort of through and now quote unquote post COVID has been like exhausting for people. And like, I see that in my colleagues and I see that in my staff, and we talk about that and we address that and we try to remedy that how we can. Like, all right, you're seeming burnout. What can we take off your plate this week to give you some breathing room? Like, I'm checking in with my staff. Hey, you haven't taken a day off in a while. Like, you need to put a vacation day in, like, let's make it happen. Hey, why don't you flex some time today? And so, really just, it's empathy all the time. Like, I really talk to my staff a lot about, like, we've got lives outside of work, and that is more important than work. And so, like, if things are going on at home that's making it hard for you to show up today, like, let's just let me know and we'll figure out a way to give you the space to deal with that, because people will work harder for you and they'll do better work when they're not burnt out and they're not torn in a million different ways worrying about at-home things. And so, I just try to lead in a different way than I've been led. And, I think it's been successful. And it's also, I will say, for some of the older male employees that I've managed, has looked like weakness to them. And there's been situations where they've attempted to exploit that. Like, oh, because you're empathetic and caring, that must mean that you're weak and that I can walk all over you. And, they're sorely mistaken by that thought, because as soon as they sort of step out of line, I'll be as empathetic and kind to you as you choose me, as you choose. When you step out of line, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're going to get a different kind of manager. So that's kind of...
Tell them.
It is. It's kind of like it's...
Get in. No.
It's a reward-based system, right? Like, I will be as caring and flexible and empathetic as you deserve. And so, and it's worked well. I'd say 90% of the time it works well. There's 10% of the time where, I've had to have a conversation and say, like, hey, don't get it twisted that I'm weak or that you can walk all over me. That's empathy and caring is not seen as weakness, and it shouldn't be. It's strength to me. So that's kind of been my kind of professional journey is leaning into those characteristics that maybe historically in the workplace and particularly in leadership have been seen as weak because, well, that's just being an emotional woman, right? Caring about your staff or talking about, the tough things or showing people grace when they're having a hard day or, showing emotion. Like, I've certainly cried in front of my staff. We do really emotional, like, taxing work, and it's hard work. And there's nothing wrong with showing the human side of work.
Absolutely. I mean, this is all really, really great perspective. I mean, it's so interesting to hear. And I'm looking forward as we interview more women on this podcast, like sometimes how your like personal and professional journeys can line up, and then how women are navigating workplace politics, like with a situation, especially in America, where like work has become so, maybe it's always been this way, but it's so exploitative and it doesn't even like hide the naked exploitation aspect of it. Like, how do you as a female leader navigate that? And I think you really articulated your philosophy and your style really well. So good insight for aspiring female leaders.
I think I've attracted some really great talent too by like, I talk about that in the interview process. I talk about, hey, you've got to make sure this is the right choice for you too. I mean, I talk a lot about that with candidates. Like, this is my leadership style. And, I'm working with our HR team to try to create a system to be able to allow candidates to do reference checks on me too. So for them to be able to talk to my staff, to ask them questions about what it's like working for me, because I want to be completely transparent to make sure that it's the right fit for them. Because maybe they don't want to deal with, maybe they're like, I don't want the touchy-feely, like vulnerability stuff. That's not the right thing for them. Then they need to make that choice for themselves. But so, trying to find as much transparency in the process as possible, because that's what's going to make a strong team. That's what's going to put out a better work product. That's what's going to make people stay, right? People leave jobs because of bad management or bad colleagues that management is not taking care of, right? Removing people that are a drain on the team. They're not correcting bad behavior. That's why people leave. People don't leave because the work's hard. They leave because the people around them, they don't want to deal with it. That's why I've left every job is I didn't have a good manager. I didn't have good support from management. I didn't have good colleagues. So yeah, I try to be as transparent as possible about those things.
I mean, and to reiterate that, that's also been my experience as well, is that when you're, again, young in my career, I'm a first gen, like white collar worker. So I did not know whatsoever, like what to expect. And so I didn't know how to vet companies for the type of fit that would be beneficial for myself. And so then you end up in these toxic situations. Sometimes the more enthusiastic they are about you and you think up front, like, oh, okay, they seem really excited to bring me on. And it's, because you're going to be the scapegoat, or you're going to be the person that they expect to magically fix all these like toxic problems internally that management doesn't want to deal with. So I had to learn that like I'm interviewing a company just as much as they're interviewing me. And it's about like a place where I'll be happy and not just a place where they can exploit or blame me for things that are really above my pay grade that people don't want to deal with. Right. So there's a dual process of learning oneself enough to know what type of work environment that you thrive in, and also acquiring the skills that would make you attractive to that environment.
I mean, my philosophy now has been, we've got a finite amount of time on this earth, and, work is a huge portion of your week. I mean, say 40 hours if you're lucky, right? Many people are working 50 plus hours a week. That's a big chunk of time each week. And I know it's a luxury to get to enjoy the work that I do. And that's not a luxury that everybody has. And so making sure that those hours are as enjoyable as you can is so important. And I think there's really been, the last few years, it's really, people have gone back to the drawing board on what they want out of a job and what they expect and what kind of treatment they expect and what work-life balance means. My whole team and I are all remote 100% of the time. And, that alone is attractive for people, as, a lot of companies are starting to force workers to go back in person for, frankly, no reason. That's allowed me to attract better candidates and better talent to my team, which is going to make ultimately the work we do so much better. And it gives me the flexibility with my team to say like, hey, it's cool if you take a long lunch break and go take your dog for a walk, if that's what you need to like be successful the rest of the day. So I just think we're in a place I think there's kind of a revolution coming as far as, working, workers' rights and expectations of jobs in the US at least. And I'm sure that this will resonate with people in other places as well. But that's what I've seen a lot. And so I'm trying to lean into that as a leader, that I can affect that change and I can solidify that change, if you will, that like I can say, no, for my team, this is what they'll get. And making sure that that is protected and I protect that and I am their voice in those conversations where that is starting to get chipped away at again. So that's really one of the privileges that I have being in the position I am, is the ability to advocate for what my team needs and kind of hold the line on that stuff.
I'm of the opinion that anybody that doesn't adapt to younger workers who need more accommodations and just basic worker perks like, work from home flexibility, we need to starve all those companies of talent. Like ruthless strategy time. Like, again, you'll hear my rants on the Patreon about this. Like, I am 100% about starving companies who refuse to adapt to workers of talent. Like, even if they're a big company like Apple or Amazon, go there, do a couple years to get your 401k vested, take all their trade secrets, take all their training and take it to another company, like point blank period, like make it cost them. Like, sorry, I hate American work culture. Did you know? Did you guys know? Sorry if I haven't made that clear from my multiple rants. So, all right.
Probably roast is scrote time now, isn't it?
Yeah, roast is scrote time.
Thank you so much, June, for sharing your story with us, both personally and professionally. You've brought so much insight to the podcast, and it was really, really great to hear from you. And thank you for being part of FDS as well. I've seen your comments in the Discord, and I know that our members there really, really appreciate your insight. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. And obviously, capping off, an FDS episode won't be an FDS episode without some form of roast somewhere. So June, the floor is yours. Do you have any scrote, past or present, in your life that you want to put on the FDS barbecue because it's summertime? And the FDS barbecue has been put in storage for some time, but we're going to whip it out today again to roast June's scrote.
I had to get into the archives here because there's so many to choose from. But the one that kind of sticks out to me is somebody, I mentioned this, let's call it a situationship. Let's call it what it really was. situationship earlier, when I talked about the gaslighting infographic that I saw and I ended this situationship, is this particular situation. So this relationship was horrible. It was, I was crying all the time and he was just like gaslighter and manipulator, didn't take care of his mental health, whatever, all of these things. And so I ended it and I said basically lose my number, blocked and deleted, whatever. So this was 3 years ago. About a month ago, I get a text out of the blue and it's like, hey, I had a dream about you. And I'm like, who is this? And of course, this person is so offended that I didn't know who they were. So offended. And so, he tells me who it is. And I'm like,
new phone, who dis?
Exactly.
The audacity for him to think that he would still matter or that you would even recognize him years after the fact is just complete screw audacity.
3 years after. And it's not like we ended on good terms, oh, this just isn't working out. It was don't ever talk to me, lose my phone number. It ended spectacularly bad. And so it was kind of I'm curious, right? I'm curious. I'm like, okay, what is this about? And, he's like, I had a dream about you and, it just got me thinking. And, and so I kind of, I poked the bear a little bit because I couldn't not poke the bear on this situation, which I don't recommend. I do not recommend doing that. But in this situation, I kind of was like, I'm curious because it was so out of the blue. And so I'm kind of like, oh, what's this about? Oh, you're the one that got away and I've been thinking about you a lot lately. And I think it's really important to note that when he and I were involved, he lived a few hours away and he was also, we were not exclusive or anything. And he was seeing another woman that lived locally and he was back and forth between the two of us all the time. And I knew I was the emotional fluffer, if you will. She couldn't give him the emotional side. So he kind of used me to get that kind of connection. And she was the physical connection for him. It was a super gross situation. And so he's like, I've missed talking to you. No one's connected with me like you did. You just really understood me. I mean, spewing complete bullshit. And I'm like, somebody who's this kind of depraved is doing this with other people too. Absolutely. And is just kind of reaching into the vault to see what women he can text to try to get, some attention from. So I'm like, okay, now I'm really curious. So I do some sleuthing. I'm like, I find this dude's Facebook. He is married. He was not married.
What?
When we were involved 3 years ago. He is married to the other woman that he was involved with at the same time as me. He's married to her now.
Isn't that always the way though? Because I feel like a lot of my exes or acquaintances who have popped up out of the blue, it's because they have made some huge commitment that they're probably freaking out about, or they are planning to, and therefore are trying to I don't know, have someone else
backpedal.
Yeah, backpedal, have someone else save them from themselves or pretend like they actually had other options when they don't.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely. So it gets worse because then I'm looking through these pictures and I realize that she is massively pregnant in a picture that was about a month old. So I asked him about this. And literally the day he texted me was the day after she gave birth to their child. And I just...
Shit.
Wow.
The physical reaction I had to this was just immediately nauseous from this.
Stuff like that is why it's so hard to like men as people, because I just feel like that's such a uniquely male thing to do. Wait till your partner has just probably made the biggest physical, mental, emotional sacrifice that they could possibly ever make for a person and just find that opportunity to completely disrespect them and go behind their back. Why right then? What is with guys like that?
Well, I think I thought through it, right? And I was thinking about, okay, so when we were involved, there was kind of this quote unquote love triangle going on a couple years ago. She was the physical person. I was the emotional person. So he was getting everything he needed from the two of us. Well, I guarantee you for the last, however long, in your third trimester, I don't think you're getting down all the time with your partner. So my guess is he wasn't getting the physical thing from her. And so, and then you can't have sex for 6 weeks after you give birth, that he's now reaching out because he's starved for attention. It just
I'm not going to lie. That's part of the reason why, a small part of the reason why I decided to become child free, because most men just don't deserve to have their genes passed down. They just become so scroty and shitty after their wife gives birth. Like, it's ridiculous.
I know. I felt so sad for his wife, in that moment. And it was so transparent to me, I guess, what was going on here. So, of course, ultimately, I told him to kick rocks, and shout out to my partner for helping me craft all these text messages. He was right there alongside me, pulling strings with me.
Love that.
A man that can roast other men with you. Oh, goals.
Those who roast together stay together is what they say.
Yeah. So on that note, that's our show. Check us out on Twitter at fem.strat and on our Patreon for weekly bonus content, as well as a Discord, as well as merchandise, as well as submitting your roast to scrotes or queen shits if you want us to read it on the podcast. You can discuss this episode on the website on thefemaledatingstrategy.com, as well as our Instagram page at _the female dating strategy. Thanks for listening, queens.
And for all you boomerang scrotes out there, we still don't want you.
Die mad.
And die alone.
See y'all next week.
See you next week.
Bye.